Okay. Okay. So thank y'all for coming. And I want to present to you my research that I did. We got you a chair right there. Thank you. My research actually started last June when me and Stephanie were in EED 601, and we had to come up with a research project. And the project that we came up with, we had talked about for our problem statement. We talked about math, we talked about word meanings, and how some words we use every day have meaning in math too, and how kids get that confused. And then we talked about, like, with our phonics instruction, how we tried to make all of our coding the same and everything so that it would be consistent as children go from one class to another. We talked about that and wondering if that would be applicable to math also. And then we also talked about splintered skills. Sometimes we get kids who can do things in one room and they go to another room and they cannot do that very same skill. And what causes that? That drives you crazy. So that kind of led to our research question, and then I had to narrow my research question down this semester, and I came up with what strategies can effectively promote student comprehension and application of math vocabulary in the second grade special education classroom, since that's the only one that I can really look at. So for my lit review, it talked about, at first I had to figure out what vocabulary really was, and it talked about familiar vocabulary, and that's words that kids know, whether it's in the right context or not. And the word that jumps out to me is and. We use and all the time, but in math, it has a very specific meaning, and so we see a lot of difference. And then the unfamiliar vocabulary, the words that we use in math that the kids just don't know what it means. And then the mathematical mediated language is where you connect the familiar with the unfamiliar vocabulary. So when you work to make them understand through something that they already know, that's mathematical mediated language. And this was the most interesting quote that I found in my review. Teachers cannot leave vocabulary development to chance because many students do not read widely, do not learn words incidentally, and are not able to use the dictionary to effectively learn word meanings. Yeah, that describes my kids to a T. Whoops, I'm sorry. So in my lit review, it said there was language-based strategies, and those include dialogic readings, and that's just where you read a story out loud to your class and have your kids talk about what's happening in the story, try to get some reasoning going on, and it creates conversations in the classroom. Math journals, we tried this, I'll tell you about in a minute, but math journals are supposed to enhance the child's vocabulary by having them write and express themselves, talk about what they know, and then the use of word walls. And then it also talked about discovery-based strategies. Talking about playing creates meaningful encounters. It helps their reasoning skills. Technology, it said not only is it visual, it's also tactile. And they suggested using iPads, and because of so many free apps. But we don't have iPads, but we do have the Chromebooks that are touch, so I substituted that. And then hands-on activities are supposed to build a foundation in logic, with the idea that if they're doing something, they're having to make sense of what they're doing. So for my design and analysis, I chose practitioner research, and I chose practitioner research because you start collecting your data immediately, you start analyzing it immediately, and then you can change your lessons based on what you found, and that's useful for me, and it was useful for me, more useful than I realized when I started this. So what I decided to do was implement one strategy a day, and I did dialogic readings, journals, word wall, hands-on activities, and games through technology. It was easier for me to combine the games and the technology piece. The units that I did, that I collected my data, were the time unit. I started with that one, and then we did the 2-digit with regrouping and the graphs. But the graphs was only a week, and I'll tell you more about that. I collected qualitative data. For my qualitative data, I did teacher reflections. I coded it to look for the strategies that caused the students to use their vocabulary, and then to keep record of impressions of the class. I did observations. I had checklists that I used to note the children using multiple vocabulary terms. We did journaling. I let everybody try it. I only collected the data, looked at the data from a focus group of children, and then I did interviews with the focus group of children. And I used that to help me see what they thought was successful versus what I thought was successful. And I was surprised to see that they were different. I did pre-tests and post-tests for my quantitative data. I did the pre-test so that I would kind of, see where we were starting, and the post-test to see where we finished. And then I also got some quasi-quantitative data that I took from my observations. So that's the holistic, and I was able to get some numbers out of that to see if I was being successful. So for my first unit was the time. I did the pre-test, and 57% of my kids, my kids scored 57%, an average of 57%. Most of that was where they knew time to the hour, and they just had to look at the clock and write the digital time on the clock. So we did some dialogic readings. In the first dialogic reading I did, I realized that they could produce 2:30, but they didn't understand that 2:30 and 2:30 was the very same thing. So what we did was we come back, and I had them all sitting at the table, and I said, I want you to sit. And I said, I want you to stand. And they stood up. And I said, okay. Now I want you to rise. And they all stood up. And so I just did several words, and every time they stood up, and I said, I'm saying different words, but you're doing the same thing. And so they finally realized, okay, 2:30 and 2:30 is the very same thing. It's just a different way of saying it. So I thought that was really interesting. And then I did another dialogic reading with them. We did the grouchy ladybug, and I changed the times to see if they could realize 1/4 quarter till, and they were very engaged in that. Everybody had their own clock, and as we read the story, they moved their clocks, and that was pretty engaging. The journaling was an epic fail. It was awful. They copied what was on the word wall, and I don't know if that's just my kids, but they did not want to express. When I said we're going to write, you could see them shut down. So I decided that you see that too. I decided I was not going to do that anymore. That was a waste of our time. For Play Through Technology, we did the Quizlet game. I don't know if any of you use Quizlet, but it's really, I made a diagram of a clock, and they got to practice. They can, it has like flashcard things, and you drag it to the proper place on the clock, so we practiced that. And then we played a Quizlet game, and the way you play that is everybody signs in, and it designates teams, so you don't get to pick who you work with. Everybody's got their Chromebook, and it puts a question up on the board. No, I'm sorry, it doesn't put the question on the board. It puts the question on their iPad, on their Chromebook. Each team has the same question, but everybody has a different answer. So they got to talk about which one's the right answer. They got to be ready to defend their answer and answer it. If they get it wrong, the questions start all over. So the race is who can get all the questions right the quickest. And they loved that. It assigns them all an animal, and that was a lot of fun, and they asked to play that several times. But one of the most important things I heard from that was I heard a kid say, 1/4 till is 15 minutes till the next hour. And so I thought, okay, they're getting it. So, and then we played another game. We did a little scavenger hunt, and one of your kids said, finally realized that the little ticks are minutes. So I thought that was pretty interesting. We had some fun with that. For the hands-on activity, we made clocks with paper plate and a brad and the hands, and that did not go very well because they got so engrossed in, do I have everything just right, that we got so engrossed in making the clock that we weren't using the clock. And then on my post-test, they scored 84%. So I thought that was pretty good. And then I went back, I had them also go back and tell me how many different ways they could say that term. And so this is my quasi-quantitative data that I got. Most of them could tell me o'clock. Lots of them could tell me half past. And then a few of them could tell me quarter till and quarter past when they saw that term written. So I thought that was really interesting. So the next unit was my subtraction unit. And on our pretest, we scored 27.5%. I noticed on that pretest that the students, if the ones were 3 minus 6, they were answering 3. They were flipping it around and doing 6 minus 3. So I knew we had to kind of go back and regroup some subtraction. So for a dialogic reading, we did have a breakthrough moment in there. We were reading about animal speeds, and I asked them how much faster the kangaroo was than another animal, and one kid said, well, let's add those two numbers together, and another kid said, that won't work, because if the kangaroo is the fastest, their amount has to be the most, and if we add them together, it's going to get bigger. So I thought, okay, we're getting somewhere. And so, they saw that. And for play, we did a thing where they had 20 on their paper, and then I just put up different backpacks and things that they could pick to buy. So they were supposed to pick one and subtract, and then we had a conversation about what you picked and how much you have left over, and could you buy something else. So that was really interesting too. We did some tens rods on a place value mat to try to figure out that. I actually did this first after the pretest to try to get them to see what you're doing when you're subtracting. So they made 34. I said, now take 21 away. And they struggled to do that. And I was shocked because they can do that. But we struggled with that. So we did that, and then we finally got to where we were breaking it down. Once we got a good grip on that, we did dimes and pennies. And I used real dimes and real pennies. And that was really interesting. And it worked well because when they needed to take that dime and move it over to the ones place, they couldn't figure out how to break that dime apart. And finally, they figured, okay, they could trade that dime for 10 pennies. And so then we had a good conversation about, does that change the amount when you do that? And they come up with, no, it only changes the arrangement of the money, not the amount of the money. So that was really interesting. And then we did another day, we did beans in a bag. We had 10 beans in a bag. So when they needed to subtract, they could open the bag and pour the beans out. And that was interesting. They were engaged in that, and they seemed to enjoy it. So this time for journaling, I tried Seesaw. And I don't know if y'all have ever used Seesaw, but it's seesaw.me. And they can go in and click journal, and they can create their own math problem. And then they can hit the record button, and they can talk. And they can explain what they did. And so that was much more productive than the journaling for me. I got lots of good responses, and they talk about expanding the numbers and subtracting the numbers. And we did the rhyme, when there's more on the floor, you got to go next door and borrow 10 more. And I got lots of that on video, and that was interesting. So on the post-test, they scored 78%, and I asked the kids to explain one problem to me so I could try to collect some data from that. And there's my data that I collected. So lots of them could use the words expanded form, tens and ones, borrowing, not so much regrouping, and standard form. We're still just not getting standard form as many times as we say that word. They don't understand that means you write a tens place and a ones place. So, and then we did graphs. I only had a week to work on graphs, so there was not a lot that I gleaned from that. But at the beginning, for the pretest, they knew 3 kinds of graphs. And then we did some dialogic readings with it that had some explicit teaching inside of it. And we made a model. We compared the boys to the girls. And one interesting thing, one kid said to me, look, if you compare them, if you match them up, the ones that are left, those are the ones that's that many more. So she got that. I was proud of that. And then we did a bar graph to compare our shoe sizes. And that one was much more successful. I heard them using greater than and less than, and smaller and less and bigger. And then we did another hands-on activity with cubes where they had to sort their own data and create a graph. And that one was not quite as successful. They got caught up in, is it cute? And you know, is mine as pretty as yours? And yeah, I know. And so we got caught up in that a little bit, and that was not as effective. So for the post test, it didn't very much because it was such a short week, and it was the week before spring break, and so then I come to my conclusions. My conclusions: the dialogic readings created a healthy struggle, and it created a sense of community. They were really talking, they were talking to each other, they were working together, and I enjoyed that. The games were engaging. They defended their answers. They worked together really well. They were pretty competitive, and so that was, we did a splash math game during subtraction. I don't remember if I said that or not, but they were really going after it because we did one splash math game on the board. And so they had to work to get their answers to be able to come up to the board and answer it, and they enjoyed that. The hands-on, some of them were helpful, some of them were not. You know, the hands-on game with the subtraction, that was pretty helpful because it helped them see how they were supposed to subtract and why they can't flip those numbers around to take the bigger from the smaller or the smaller from the bigger. The journaling, I won't use journaling in my class probably unless I do it through seesaw.me because that was the most helpful way when they were able to just talk about what they had done. So that's what I learned, and so it left me to wonder if the same things would be effective in your class or if it would be effective in, you know, using other subjects. Is this a good way to teach other subjects too? But I do think it made me grow in my math teaching that I feel so rushed when they come in because I've got 30 minutes and I feel like I got to and it really made me see that letting them, having that learner-centered classroom instead of a teacher-centered classroom is an effective way to teach that I didn't think I could do. So, have any questions or anything? No? Okay. Thank you.